Welcome to another DragonLance Saga creator episode. My name is Adam, and today I am talking with the talented individuals behind DragonLance Test of High Sorcery, available on DM's Guild right now. Now, there's a link in the description below if you want to check that out, and I highly recommend you do because it is different and very kind of cool if you're sort of old school like I am. I would like to take a moment and thank the members of this YouTube channel and invite you to consider becoming a member if you're not already, and of course, like that link to Test of High Sorcery in the description, you can get other Dragonlance materials the same way as well. Thank you both so much for taking the time and joining me today.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us.
absolutely.
Oh, it's a privilege. So I want to start just sort of an introduction for those in the audience who may not know who you are. Just let us know a little bit about yourself. Jonathan, how about you first?
Sure, yeah. I'm Don. I am a full-time tabletop role-playing game writer and designer, and I run a ton of D&D and other systems. I love Dragonlance. I've been running Dragonlance various campaigns in 5th edition. I ran in previous editions too, but I've been running in 5th edition now for like 5 years or so. So I was obviously really excited by the opportunity to maybe self-publish something that's actually in Dragonlance in this setting that I love.
That's great. Kienna.
Yeah, so I'm Kienna. I am also a TTRPG writer, designer, person of many hats in the space. I have done a bunch of freelance work across different things, but some people may know my 5e work as a contributor to Candlekeep Mysteries, as well as some other stuff. I'm also the co-curator of the TTRPG Safety Toolkit. So Don and I have worked together over time, and this is just our latest project. And I think it's a cool one. I'm biased, but...
Well, justifiably, I would say. Let me give a quick shout out to the people in the chat. Skull Cowboy, thanks for tuning in live. Murtis, how you doing? DMD20, thank you so much for tuning in. Chris, always great to see you. Let's see who else we got here. Andrew, thank you so much for joining live. Matthew, it's great to see you. Ron, not Burgundy, but close. Bogard, thanks for tuning in, man. And Solid Company, it's always great to see you. David, what is up? All right, so if you guys have any questions or comments throughout the course of our conversation, throw them up there. We'll try to get to them and answer every single one of them as long as they're, rational. Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate that. Happy holidays to you. And to everyone tuning in live. Of course, tomorrow is sort of holiday eve. I don't know what everyone individually does, but it's kind of a big weekend. So I really am glad that we can take the opportunity tonight to talk about the test, because this is a subject that has boggled DMs' minds forever. I've never actually read a story about the Test of High Sorcery that I felt was satisfying, and Margaret Weiss has written 2 of them. So I think it's very interesting that you two took on something that potentially is an impossible task. So let's start from the sort of the beginning before we really get into any nit and gritty stuff here. When did you first decide, I think we should probably develop a Test of High Sorcery?
It wasn't long ago. It kind of came together because there wasn't a lot of time when we knew for sure. We weren't sure if when they released the 5th edition, Shadow the Dragon Queen, if they would open up the setting for people to create, their own content and publish it on DM's Guild. So we were kind of waiting. And I want to say we started talking about it in September.
Yeah.
And we started doing the narrative design first, which is a big part of how this adventure has to be designed, the way that we went about it, at least. And most of the writing took place in October. It was a mad scramble to get it done in time.
It really was. Yeah, I mean, Don and I have been talking about doing another project together for a while. Our last big one was a similar kind of choose your own adventure solo game book style thing called To Hell and Back Again, which would for Descent into Avernus. And we're like, we want to do something like that again. And we just didn't know what. And then once Dragon Queen was announced, we were like, maybe that, as long as we're allowed to.
Yeah.
But we were on a shorter timeline than we normally are. So, but we managed to get it out.
Yeah, I mean, that's 2 months, right?
Yeah,
basically. Pretty much, yeah.
That's ridiculous. Because, I mean, not only do you have to do all of the planning, all of the writing, collect all of the artwork, get all of the layout done. I mean, that's that's a huge task to be able to realize. What's the team size that contributed to this?
Well,
Very small.
very small.
I did the layout for To Hell and Back Again, and we both decided that that was not a smart idea to do again, considering our creds. And
Still
so
bear the scars.
and so we actually hired someone that I've worked with before for layout, Virginia Page. So we got someone to do that, and we also commissioned Nick Beecher to do the amazing cover art. So there's that, and then Dawn's lovely wife Adeline did our editing.
Our copy editing.
Bless her, because it was full of a lot of stuff going on in there.
Always is.
And we had play testers too. So usually, you might want like a lot of time to play test, but our play testing happened very, very quickly as like layout was coming together. And so we had a great group of play testers who went through, sort of more significant encounters and their overall experiences, and all those folks got credited in the book as well. But it was it was a very small team compared to most books, I think, this size.
So, I mean, first of all, the scope alone, I mean, you quote in there's 60 unique outcomes, and just the idea of trying to map out this choice to that choice, which could lead back to that choice, which another choice tree ended up going to, like, to map all of that out in that sort of choose your adventure style. I feel like Charlie from like It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, like looking at the board.
That's how we felt too. It's definitely how we felt.
Yeah, we have a Google Sheets which has all of our the traits that you can get and all the different outcomes that can end up happening. It's a lot. I think only we could understand what's going on in there because it is messy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things going on. As you said, a lot of different things we had to keep track of and make sure that everything was consistent throughout and unique and interesting to play with. There was a lot of like, wait, can someone get both of these traits that would be like conflicting with each other?
Right.
Or what traits need to follow which ones and which one needs to, like, what threads need to happen to get to certain ends. It was very much at least we had practice doing this before, but this is at a much bigger scale.
This is way more ambitious than our last book that we did a few years back together, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I'm still trying to just like wrap my head around how this is even possible, because were you still game designing as layout was being applied and as you were getting ready to release it to DM's Guild? Like how late in the process were you still trying to get all those threads together?
I mean, we've released an update to the book since we released, minor things, which is one of the nice things about, most of the stuff that we do is for publishers. And it's like, once it goes to print, well, you hope you got it right, because now, there's thousands of copies out there for people. But, self-publishing, one of the advantages is you can kind of like release updates. And so we got back like some late play tests, and that kind of changed our perspective on a couple of the encounters. There's a survey in the back of the book that you can take when you finish. And it's like, how did I do on my test? What collar robe did I get? And what other, outcomes did I get? And we started to see some data come in through that suggested that maybe there were a couple of paths that were not as common as maybe we wanted them to be. And we were like, well, that's easy to tweak. We can go in there and fix that really simply.
Yeah.
And so, but as far as like the last minute, and I think the last 4 days before release were just nonstop. And as layout was working on things, we were getting playtest stuff in. I was like, anytime I ran out of things to do myself, I was playtesting the encounters, and that's just, it kind of felt like if you ever do theater or something like that, like the dress rehearsal where everything goes wrong until it all comes together. That's what the end of putting this book together felt like.
Yeah, it was very much like a rolling kind of thing. Like as soon as we had one section we were good and knew we were done, we would hand it off to layout and then keep going from there. So it's just like whatever material we had, we would give to layout. And Virginia is a saint for putting up with all of our wait, we found a typo over here. Wait, we found this thing. but she's an incredible person to work with. So
Yeah.
she made it very easy and smooth for us to go through.
Well, can I ask why the Test of High Sorcery? Of all the things you could attempt to tackle, why this?
I think for me, we've been talking, Kienna mentioned, we've been talking about like, well, we want to do something together. Again, in this style of adventure, it's fun to write and design. It's different than the other work we do.
Yeah.
But there's also there's an actual demand for it, for people to play, to have adventures they can play alone or with friends, is a kind of a growing need as the number of players exceeds the number of available game masters in D&D.
Right.
And we're very aware of that. So we knew we wanted to do something like this. I've been running this campaign that 4 of my 6 players are wizards. They have been going to try to get to the Tower of Wayreth to take their test, and the other 2 are not. They're companions. And so I had to design, using the 3.5, the Tower of High Sorcery and some of the other materials out there, 4 full tests, which is 32 individual challenges that are all based on their band. It was already very fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
And something about, there's an old book, the book that kind of one of the books that speaks to Raceland's test and Dragonlance is Soulforge, which was inspired by a game book, Choose Your Own Adventure game book from 1985, also called the Soulforge. There you go.
That's the nerd I am. I have it right on call.
And I think you mentioned there's a lot of challenges like DMs. How do I run this? How do I? And it's different for every group. It's one thing if you have 1 wizard in an entire group, but what if you have 4? What if your other players don't want to go on the test, or they're not as interested in the test as your wizard's player is? Can you really afford to run all of those encounters and just kind of hold them at bay, or have them dragging their feet and just kind of following along? So we thought that this approach to the adventure you could use so that a player could play it by themselves and then come back into their game, or enjoy it as a standalone experience, or GMs might be able to go in and take the ideas from the book, some of the encounters they make them even more custom to their players and use them however they want. So it felt like it was maybe more modular to kind of approach it this way.
Yeah. And for me, I am newer to Dragonlance. I only got into D&D at 5th edition, and Dawn was my introduction to Dragonlance, actually. And when we're talking about ideas, and you talked through the Test of High Sorcery, I found it very interesting because it really matched up with the unique strengths that solo game books have, and Choose Your Own Adventure style things do. Because, there aren't a lot of, in the world of D&D and stuff, a lot of things are kind of centered around group work and around obviously you can go and have little side quests onto yourself, but so much is based on you are a party doing things, and creating intriguing things for people to engage with when they're by themselves is a unique challenge, and one that needs to be approached with in solo play with D&D. And the Test of High Sorcery just kind of felt like it really fit that concept really well. You are someone who has to go through a very personal adventure, and then we were like, okay, but this is also a really unique game challenge because we can't be there as live GMs to customize something for a player, and so how do we make this customized to people and make it interesting while all through game design stuff? So I was also just drawn to that challenge, and where things could go wrong, and I think the test happened to just be a really good example of that. And from what I was researching it myself and looking up materials and stuff, it's there hasn't been anything for this in a really long time.
Yeah.
Nobody really knows how to do this. There's no guidance. There's no example really, especially not for 5th edition. So I was really excited to try to do it ourselves. And we gambled. We gambled really hard. We were like, oh, we're gonna hope that the 5th edition adventure doesn't have a thing about the test, and we lucked out.
It sort of does. It sort of does, but it's definitely different. It's definitely different.
Yeah, we
it's infinitely more like, here's some ideas, DM, really surface level stuff, but have at it, Haas. You know, like not really helpful, not like this. I mean, there we have to really clarify that there's a big difference between something like the Soul Forge, which is a narrative story about an established hero of the lands going through his test of high sorcery, versus what you're presenting, which is you get to run your own character through it and have your own individual experiences that are going to dramatically differ from other people. And the ending is not always going to be, safe and expected, right? I mean, there is an opportunity, if with every test of high sorcery, you either make that soul forge with the magic or you die. So ultimately, I mean, you want someone, you're going to create this because you want people to succeed and have fun through the process. You don't want to kill them on page 2, choice 3. So how do you try to balance that aspect of you want this to feel substantial and meaningful versus you still want them to, actually get through it, but that you want them to feel like they accomplished something, but you don't want it over too quickly. Like, how did you balance all of that stuff?
I think we approached it from a few different ways. There's a significant portion at the beginning of the adventure where there's not really any danger. You go through, Wayreth Forest, and then you're at the tower. There's intrigue at the tower, and you do an interview with the leaders of the Orders of High Sorcery. And during all of that time, our adventure is pulling the choices that you make, the things that we can learn about your character through the choices they make, so that we can customize the adventure later on for you. And so, there's a good portion of the beginning that says a lot about your character. There's a lot of opportunities for solo role play or group role play there, but it's not dangerous. And then we used this mechanic before. One of the tricks of designing D&D, it's like Kienna said, it's not really designed for solo play. Action economy, how many players you have versus how many enemies you have if you're in a combat scenario, matters a lot. If you even have one person that you're with, then the likelihood of you dying is much, much less, because they can heal you, or they can at least make a medicine check to like stabilize you if you get reduced to 0 hit points. That goes away in solo play. So we have a mechanic that we use called destiny points. And destiny points are a way, they kind of double in this adventure. They're a way for you to survive the random number generator of D&D, like a really bad damage roll that's like, oh, wow, that feels bad. I just got wiped out in 1 hit, and that was just an unlucky roll. And they also, because part of the test is, kind of judging how much risk you take and how well you do on the test, they also help us judge at the end, like, well, how well did you do on your test? Well, how many destiny points do you still have at the end? And you can use those points in a few different ways throughout the adventure. But I think the way that people probably use them the most is just to survive when the numbers go against them. And that helps reduce the randomization in D&D and make it so that you can at least make it pretty far into the adventure. And I expect that most people who die probably die right at the end, which, if you're going to die, that's the way to go out, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, you got to pull out all the stops.
Exactly. And we spent a lot of time also looking at really thinking about how the choices make consequences. And sometimes those choices, like as Don said at the beginning, are just like, did you defend this person from being bullied or did you not? And those actually have long-term consequences in the end, because you end up getting into different scenarios based on those actions. But also just over time, what are things that may have long lingering consequences beyond your adventure, even if you survive? So that's a bunch of the outcomes that we have too. It's like, hey, so you have this weird magical curse now, and here's some ideas for you or your game master to go off into the future and pull on it as an adventure hook, or as a way to kind of see how your character has been shaped by the adventure. And we actually do have choices throughout the trials for people to give up their magic in exchange for something, as is classic test stuff. I got to handle that section, and that was super fun because it's really interesting to go like, okay, how can the traits that I pulled from you in the beginning parts, how can I pull that against you and play that against you and have you make that choice? And the choice to give up it isn't just this is the end of your story now. I very specifically try to make it so that there were interesting things to go off of from there, so you don't just like fade into obscurity. You just have to put your character in retirement.
Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time thinking about consequences. Destiny points are a great way for us to do that. But even just within the way that choose your adventure style solo game books have to be, you have to go, what choices at the beginning end up influencing your pathways? And that's why I think we calculated how many paths you could take, and there's several hundreds of thousands you could take in the just the combinations of all of them. Because we did like I think 3 or 4 things per section, like 3 or 4 paths per section, and those branch out very quickly.
I really like how you use the character choices like sort of pre-programmed in the set, just the sort of setup of the test in order to then influence the outcomes later on, because that's what DMs do anyway. You know the characters, you know the players, you have an idea about what they're going to do, but ultimately you want to have that spontaneity of being able to turn on a dime and say, okay, well, you're sort of going against your character with this choice, as I've always learned and expected of you. Now I need to sort of adjust based on that choice, and to have that sort of already pre-planned in there, I think is a very interesting way of approaching it as well, because then you do feel like it is a custom test to your choices and not just canned responses that you're going through or canned actions. There's a question here at the very beginning. Hey, Goldmoon, thanks so much for tuning in. Great to see you. Given the new rules, how would the test alter a warlock? So I don't really want to focus on like the sort of mechanics of 5th edition with warlocks, in Dragonlance or anything like that. I'm a little bit more interested in, do you make a distinction at all between anyone who can use magic and then come in and use this source?
Not in this book, no. And then that's 5th edition, that's the decision that, Wizards of the Coast made with their book. And so we followed that because it's a 5th edition book, and we want it to be compatible and accessible to people who maybe for the first time they're playing, maybe their first Dragonlance adventure ever is Shadow of the Dragon Queen. And so no, we don't make a distinction within our book. We don't build or design new lore for warlocks that didn't exist previously. This adventure, like you said, it's like laser focused, right? Mm-hmm. This is the Test of High Sorcery. And so however you want to bring, your campaign and your lore to it, you're able. It's not even set at a specific point in time. So you could play it in the Age of Dreams, or you could play it in the Age of Mortals later on, at least. It's pretty open-ended that way.
Yeah, and even we created pre-generated characters in case somebody just wanted to pick up and play and didn't want to go through the thing of making a character. And we did a variety of classes there. Like we have a wizard, we have a sorcerer, we have a bard. So we even have a fighter in case you're someone who's tagging along with your group of people and you're like, well, I guess I'm going to the Test of High Sorcery and helping my magic buddies out. So we made it very we pull on Dragonlance lore, and a lot of that was Dawn's work, because I was like, there's so much of this, I don't know what's happening. But a lot of it was just, you're a magic user. The important thing is that you're a magic user and you want to be here. The whole thing is that we're making the premise that you are a mage wanting to go to take the test, because why would we go through the effort of being like, do you want to take the test? No, the point is that you have already decided.
Choice number 1, should you pick this book up?
Right.
Can you even cast magic?
Yeah, and so we will assume that people who are coming in with characters that may be a warlock or unconventional magic users are coming in with that knowledge in mind, that they're here to take the test to do everything about it.
Yeah. So Murtis is asking, would getting into the test be the hardest part of the test? I mean, just from the surface level, outside of, no, just buy the source book and you can get into the test. But like role-playing wise, no, you're encouraged to take the test. Otherwise, you're a renegade and you'll be hunted and murdered. That's it's the whole thing. That's what makes Dragonlance as far as wizards are concerned. I find it interesting because, again, the Test of High Sorcery is something that is so challenging for a lot of not just players on what to expect, because it is so open-ended and they didn't even bother trying to really break down what to expect until you got to the saga system and then third edition after that. But then also from the dungeon master side, like, how do I make this meaningful? We have the ultimate outcome of the Test of High Sorcery in front of us in all the novels with Raisel Magir. How could I possibly create something that would make the player feel like their character is on par with that hero of the lance? Because ultimately you are the hero of the lance of your own game. So you want it to be as impactful and as empowering, and you want to feel like that super badass after you're finished with it. You also kind of want to feel like it costs you something, because that's part of the entire process, is that magic costs something. We see it in the novels as far as like exhaustion levels. Just casting a spell will wind you, because you're literally calling down arcane forces from gods. In Dragonlance, it all comes from gods. In other worlds, it comes from wherever. But there should be some taxing element associated with that. And so for a DM to be able to create something that is impactful for a player is a lot to ask. I mean, it's a lot. And so what I really appreciated about this is that, yeah, you could just like sort of buy it and toss it at your player and say, here, I gifted this to you, run through it. And when you're done, let's check up again. Or you as the DM could use it as your sort of manual on how to run it, and just narrate what they're experiencing. Instead of them reading it, you're playing, the book itself, as it were, and they're just sort of reflecting back off of you as if it was a regular game session, and you can still have that really wonderful one-on-one experience, or as you guys have created options available for other players to join in on it. I would never recommend a player join in on a Test of High Sorcery. That seems ridiculous to me. But
it's a suicide run for that character.
There's no upside either. You're like, either I die or I help you do something, but I'm still sitting here with all the wounds. Like,
yeah, there's a reason why the fighter pre-gen is bound by oath to protect the mages. It's the only reason we could get him to go there with everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, it's that or cookies, one of the two.
That's
give
right.
Give me a nice chocolate chip, maybe I'll do it. So I think this is interesting, because this is a question that comes up. If anyone's familiar with previous editions, third level is the time you need to take the Test of High Sorcery. In Shadow of the Dragon Queen, they're actually pushing it past fourth level because of the situations that you're actually in. Do you set this up in this book as maybe, approach it around this level?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do. It's we say fourth level, and it's really because at fourth level, you still don't have access to third level spells, but you have a few more hit points, which makes the random, the game design, it says game design reason, it's a little less random at fourth level than it is at third level. And there is a feat and we didn't plan this, but there's a feat in the new Shadow of the Dragon Queen for mages of high sorcery at fourth level that they get access to at fourth level. Yeah. And so, after we bought the book in pre-release, so we got early access to it. And we read it as we were writing our final drafts. We read the book to make sure that we could align what we were doing as well as we could with what they were doing. And so, we have some recommendations in there there's a specific point that kind of just worked out perfectly in Wizard of the Coast book. I won't spoil it, where you could just go and take the test at fourth level. Yep. You'll be fourth level at the time, but you don't. Instead, you go do something else instead. And so we provide like a really simple guideline for how you can take it then, and how you can tie it to the feats that you get at that level and that sort of thing.
Yeah, what I really like about that is that in a world where you can literally teleport through time, if you're not one of the Grey Gem races, you want to go back in time just to observe, like Wizards of High Sorcery just do that. Like, it's just a thing that they can do. So like, if you can just cast a spell to go through time or to teleport to any point in the actual planet, why could you not just go take it? Like, That doesn't make any sense. Of course, like, just have whoever is, I don't want to give anything away for the adventure, but have that person just teleport you over and you're there and problem solved. No problems. And And then, of course, yeah, everything's customizing. Like the whole point of being a DM and being in a role playing game, is that you get to customize it to the experience. So I would like to think that no one's running an adventure as if I have to do every single step in this exact way. Like, you want to make it fun for the players. That's the whole point. It's shared storytelling, after all. Um, can I ask you really quick, because the Destiny points are very similar to hero points, as already in the existing vernacular. Why did you change the name? Is there a different function that you had them for? Like, I was just a little bit confused about the disparity there.
I love hero points, and hero points, they can be used in other ways too, like introducing narrative ideas and things like that, which I think is a really cool. Not like I don't know a lot of DMs who use them, but I love them. They're one of those optional rules that exist that I think get overlooked. Destiny points were, a limited number of them. We needed to balance them both for solo play and for group play. If you do have teammates that you bring along, they're just more specific to this adventure, I think. And ultimately, I think that's why. Plus, we found out they're an experimental mechanic that we played around with our last adventure. And we found out through like a lot of the people who played that adventure, that was like their favorite part. And we're like, well, we can bring that back. We can make that work.
And Destiny Point as a name is interesting to us because so much of the Test of High Sorcery is playing with your own fate, going through a path to see what you make of your life. And Destiny just seems like the right loaded word. It worked out that was the term that we used before. And it's true, like you're taking your destiny into your own hands at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And to be quite honest, you don't always have to be a hero to survive and get through that thing. Most of the people we've had play this so far have ended up being white or red robes, which is fascinating to me.
The black robes are catching up, though. They're catching
up. My guess is that people go through their nice person routes first, and then they're like, okay, now we can be.
I believe that.
You gotta take the gloves off. This is too hard.
There's a slight legal thing too. I'd have to look into it, but there's certain, when you publish on DM's Guild, there's certain material that you're able to use and certain material that you're not able to use as part of the license that allows you to publish. Mm-hmm. And I don't believe, I'd have to double check. I don't even know if hero points, a lot of those optional rules from the Dungeons Master's guide aren't available to you to use.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know that. I find that very interesting that they would sort of limit options.
Yeah, that's licensing. SRD and OGL stuff is all about that. It was very fun to have to build pre-gen characters only based on the SRD spell list.
Right.
Because it's not the full spell list. Yeah. And we had to be like, okay, can the problems we're presenting in the test be solved by SRD only? Because we're also putting this as like, if someone is new to D&D and they don't have the ability to buy the book yet, they can get the SRD for free. And so being able to make sure that it's accessible even at that level for people to play was important. So we actually did have to go through the adventure and be like, are these actually solvable by spells that someone could potentially have, even if they're just looking at the very bare bones of the game, which is interesting to say the least. We were just like, what about this spell? We're like, nope, we can't use that spell. That spell is locked behind doors over there. Yeah. So
I think that's really interesting. I mean, ultimately, you want to make sure that it's accessible to whomever is going to want to play it. And if it's a DM running the game on behalf of the player, then of course they can make exceptions and sort of adjust course. But if it is just you by yourself playing through it, then you have to be able to finish it. Otherwise, it's completely broken and it wouldn't make any sense. What was like some of the most challenging aspects of this for you? Because you had mentioned you already did something already that's lesser scale to what you've accomplished here, and so you have a little bit of experience under your belt for that. But what were some of the bigger challenges that you faced?
I think it was definitely the making sure the threads were coherent, like the story threads were coherent throughout, and that things felt like they were, like the different parts of the test felt like they were connected to each other. We had to do a lot of talking between the two of us about like, okay, so if this person takes the hag test over here, what does that mean if they end up going to the dragon stuff afterwards, and all that stuff there, and making sure that like choices, not just at the beginning of the first chapter where you're just going to the Tower of Wayreth and socializing and picking up all those first basic traits. How can we also find ways to make traits happen during the test itself and make that connected throughout? And it was just a lot of brain work. It was just a lot of design and narrative design to make that happen. And I think that was like 90% of our time was doing that.
That was like the first month. That's all we did was the narrative design. And we are kind of like narrative design nerds. Like we love that stuff. But it, before we started writing, the first words, besides maybe like most of the first chapter, I think we knocked out the kind of like introduction chapter. But that was a lot of the time. There's two, like, it's tough. So we wanted this to feel accessible to people who've never played Dragonlance before and no other fantasy settings, but we wanted it to feel authentic to Dragonlance. And there's characters in here, some iconic characters, like Fist and Dantalus shows up and in a meaningful way. And you were talking before, like, how do you make this feel for the player like their character is just as badass as Raceland, or at least trying to be? And so, there are, big moments that can happen or do happen within the course of the adventure that can like kind of put them down this path of like, no, my character, if they make it through this, they make it through the Soul Forge. They do have something meaningful to do in this world. And so writing those characters and writing those moments so they felt authentic, creating tests that felt, like they were part of Dragonlance and detailed, because a lot of the tests, because of the style of adventure, it's a very detailed, the way that it's written. But also, like, what if I don't know Dragonlance? What if I know, Hunger Games or one of these other, like, what if I'm newer to D&D, but I do know like genre? How can we create things that feel like Dragonlance, but also like people are going to get it because they connect it to other stories that they do know that are maybe more recent? And so like all of that was part of our, our process. And that was challenging. It's intimidating to write. I run Dragonlance a lot, and Fist and Dantalus is almost always one of my major villains, and Lord Soth is almost always one of my major villains in my campaigns. But there's something intimidating about like writing those characters, like writing words that, for a book in those characters.
Yeah, I'd be afraid I'd do a little too Saturday morning cartoon villainy. You know what I mean? Like a lot of mustache twirling.
That's right.
Yeah, the fun thing about that is my introduction to Dragonlance was Dawn running a live stream campaign of it. And I played a character who was like, I don't really know Dragonlance. I've done like a cursory Google of it. Here's my character. And Dawn made her the daughter of Fist and Dantalus.
Like basically like adopted.
Like completely just on surprise for me and for everybody else. And then there was a reveal of that during the stream, and everyone lost their minds, and I was over here being like, let me just Google who this is really quickly.
It's just dad to me. Why are you guys reacting this way?
This is his dad. And so being able to, Don does a really good job with voicing characters and stuff. He did it before for To Hell and Back Again. He did all the writing for our Holofont, Lulu in it, which everyone thought I wrote because they were like, yes, clearly the cheerful one is the one who wrote the cheerful Holofont. No, that was all Don. But like he's really good at voicing that stuff, so I knew he was gonna do well. And yeah, there's a little Fist and Dantalus potential. It's only a potential. You could choose to totally skip over that part by accident, but for all you Dragonlance nerds, there is a possibility. There's a possibility that he'll take interest in it, in you taking the test.
Yeah, I always love that. There's always that notion of, like Robert Johnson going to the crossroads and selling his soul to the devil. And arguably that's what Raceland did when he, took the test and he accepted Fist and Dantalus's help. The idea of this seemingly otherworldly entity taking an interest in you for selfish reasons and then sort of using you for some ultimate end. We don't really get a lot of like, you appealing to them and them being like, yeah, you're just not good enough. No, move along. I always like the idea, like, and I don't know, is this ever even an option? Because I didn't run through every scenario in the book. Is there an option Ficinellus turns down people?
There's early on, there's an option where, if there's a point in the adventure where maybe if you try, you might connect with him, and maybe he might make you an offer that might come into play later when you meet again. But based on some of the choices that you've already made up to that point, he might also say like, you've kind of already got your own thing going on, so I'm just going to watch. He gives you a little bit of advice,
you've got
which
enough
is
help already.
that's right.
Yeah,
He gives you
You
some
don't need
dubious
me.
advice. Like, I don't know if most people would consider it good advice, but maybe depending on your character, you might. And then he just tells you, "I'm going to be watching you," and that's the end of that particular branch.
yeah. Now you're just paranoid for the rest of your life.
That's
wondering
right.
If Ficinellus is
Yeah,
watching
absolutely.
you.
He's just like, oh, you've already got help. All right, well, I'll just watch you from afar. Goodbye.
That's
it.
unnerving.
That's all you
That
get.
is like 20 years later, you're taking a leak. I can't go if you're watching, Ficinellus. Honestly, trying to, man, I can see it. That's just where my mind goes. I don't know why. So, I mean, you had mentioned that you had, done something similar to this, as was earlier mentioned. I don't want to sort of jump into what's next or anything, but I think one of the really great experiences for players is to feel like they've gone through something in order to earn something. And so for a young wizard, that is, in order to cast greater, more powerful spells, you have to become a part of this fraternity, this Order of High Sorcery. And in order to do that, you have to take this tremendous test, and, death is an opportunity. And so, you're really, if you're going to actually study this and you're going to devote your life to it, you're literally devoting your life to it. Have you ever considered extending that to other classes, especially with 5th edition? I always found it very underwhelming the way that you're able to sort of choose a subclass at 3rd level, but it never presents you with any sort of experience. Like, you're going to specialize in some way in the class that you've chosen, but you just sort of get to 3rd level and you choose it. There's no like real substance to it, like going to the Test of High Sorcery. Have you ever considered doing something similar to different types of classes, like wizards or any spellcaster class, for example, with the Test of High Sorcery that you just developed?
I mean, I think it's a really good idea. We
I
didn't
was literally
talk-
about to say.
Yeah, it's a
Good
great idea. Yeah, I think there would be a demand for that. I think people would get a lot out of that. It doesn't even need to necessarily be because this is a pretty intricate, in-depth adventure. You could do something shorter for each class. I think there's some there's some licensing concerns, like we mentioned with the spells. You can't really necessarily use that many different spell subclasses, that many different archetypes as written, but I think you could probably allude to them as like an outcome. We did talk briefly about like, hey, I wonder, like, what about the Knights of Solamnia? Right? Like, could there be something similar in Dragonlance, because that's the other, the other half, one of the other most iconic things that players like to engage with is the knighthood. And I think we felt more confident that like this is a harder thing to actually pull off. And you can see that in Shadow the Dragon Queen. There's actually a good amount of engagement with the Knights of Solamnia. They kind of come into the story a little bit more frequently. But you could do that, like with, climbing through the knighthood or, quest of virtue, that sort of thing. And I think you could do it with subclasses too. I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I just feel like it's an opportunity that, I know whenever I play a game, I like to feel special, like if I go to 3rd level, my buddy goes to 3rd level, he gets to take this special test. And I'm just like, all right, I get to hit something a little harder. Great. Like I'm not as important apparently, So I don't know. It's something that always sort of bothered me. I've always done it in my home games whenever I DM to make people feel like they're actually heroic and they're going through these evolutionary processes. Like, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons right out stated that you needed to train before you could even level up with someone of that level or higher. And that just gives you that option of, well, now I have to find someone that's great and I need to, aspire to be trained by them in order to get to these higher levels, it creates massive role-playing opportunities of, incredible fun, or maybe frustrating if your DM sucks, but ultimately opportunities. And it's just vacant in this, so I don't know. I thought it was cool, and you guys did such a good job with this. I figured I'd throw it out there and see if you were interested in
It's a good
looking at
idea.
it.
It's a very good idea.
Yeah.
I may be the
Straight
only
up
one,
this
so it
idea.
may not be
I
monetarily
mean, I
good.
think it's a really cool way of looking at, like, yeah, the fact that there's one thing for magic users, and I think it could be really interesting.
Right.
After Dot and I go into hibernation for a bit.
Yeah, you gotta recoup.
That's right.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's been a crazy year for the both of us. I have like I'm running the Test of High Sorcery right now. Like they're ending. They're at their duels, right? They're the final test. But like, what did the other two players that aren't wizards in my campaign do? They didn't want to go in there, and I don't blame them. It sounds awful. And so like I created a war plot to throw them into,
Cool.
So they're all fighting a war while their wizard friends are taking the test. And, that's how I approach making them feel special within Dragonlance. I just like the idea that like, cause this is how I play D&D. When I'm a character, if I start off at level 1, when I get to level 3 and it's like, what, archetype am I going to pick? I usually like don't decide that ahead of time. I decide it based on like, well, what's my character going through? What have they earned? But to actually give them a little like tiny adventure where they would play through and actually earn something by the choices they make, I think it's a great idea.
I love that stuff. That's cool. So there's a question here that I want to address. Now I can't find it because you people talk in the chat room.
Your chat are too chatty.
Yeah.
They like talking too much.
Simmer down, people. No, it was can a renegade wizard play in this from DMD 20? And yeah, that's the point. What I always loved about Dragonlance when it came to the Wizards of High Sorcery is that each order of High Sorcery approaches renegades completely differently. So your white robes are going to literally try to convince renegade wizards to join the order to save them from, ultimately, as they see it, arguably themselves, but ultimately from like the black robes or the red robes. The red robes will give you the opportunity, but then they might also kill you if you refuse it. And then the black robes will straight up say, look, you're going to serve me and take this test, or I'm going to end your life right now. So it depends on the order, but everyone is somehow going to try to get you to take the order of High Sorcery, because ultimately magic on Krynn is supposed to be so incredibly powerful. It has to be structured. And you don't want crazy people like Kender getting their hands on magic, because who knows what would happen at that point. So it has to maintain in that order. So yes, renegade wizards definitely have to take it, or else they're just going to perpetually be renegades. And if that's what
you got to be really good.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, mages did it.
Yeah,
but
if you better hope that you're really good if you're a renegade.
Yeah. So there's a question earlier on that I noted I never really got to, and you sort of partially answered it anyway, but I want to bring it up in a different sort of way. So the original question was, is Dalamar one of the Orders of High Sorcery? And that is locked into a time frame. During the War of the Lance, of course, Dalamar is not even, the student of Raceland at that point. So there's no way he would be. And the only time he was actually in charge of the Order was in the 5th Age, when LaDonna, I think it was, stepped down. So when it comes to these iconic characters, and you spoke to it with Fisionalis, for example, when you were designing this, did you intentionally go vague with the heads of orders, or did you like throw in any specific names? Because, other than an active lich, depending on the era, that person may not even be alive. So how did you approach that of calling out specific people in these?
Yeah, we were very vague. And that goes throughout the entire thing to be customizable. Like at points we have like talks about family members of the character, or talks about, a lost loved one or stuff like that. And we have to be, we made it clear that like we are being pretty generic about it, so that people can fill in their own stuff as needed. And we kind of did the same thing with like characters that would have to be locked to a specific time. we were like, we want to make sure that people can play this in whatever time frame they're doing it in, because who knows what their campaign is like, and we don't want to make them go through the work. And of course, like if they're not if they're not familiar with DragonLance lore, putting out a specific name isn't going to mean a lot to them.
Yeah.
There's gonna be like, okay, this person, cool. And while it's a nice Easter egg, I think it takes away from the modularity from it. Yeah. We were just like the head of the white robes.
You know, that person.
Yeah.
Fist and Dantalus, there's a few characters in there that we do name who are like, well, Fist and Dantalus travels through time. And he's also one of the, we don't know exactly, canonically, we don't know exactly when he joined, but it was pretty early on. So there's a good chance that Fist and Dantalus could be a character in any age. Takesis is always around. Always a character that could show up to influence events. So there's certain characters like that. And when we talked about like the mages, or leaders of the orders, we looked at like, some of the novels and some of the voices and some of the perspectives of those characters that are canonical to, inform how we wrote. Like, I would say the characters have specific voices. We just don't name them because we want you to be able to name them for your game.
Yeah. I think that's important just for playability so that it's applicable to as many people as possible. Arguably, I would even go so far as to say, you could keep this setting independent. I mean, you don't need to be DragonLance or on Krynn in order to run through this. This is just an interesting option for any wizard to sort of take that next step in power growth, to go through this, as I was saying with the other classes. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be on Krynn or anything. You can still apply this to any wizard or any magic user in any setting or just your own home settings. And it's as entertaining to go through and as impactful for your character in the long run, assuming you survive, of course. I guess it's pretty impactful if you die too. So I don't know. I guess either way, it's great. But yeah, and I wanted to bring that up because ultimately when you're talking about creating something for a specific campaign setting, the next question is, well, do we need to set this campaign setting up for other people? How much campaign setting information do you have to include if you're just creating the Test of High Sorcery? And I found it interesting because you guys included enough to sort of let the people know, if they're not familiar with Dragonlance, this is the kind of flavor that you get. But then you also included more than I personally thought you even needed. And part of the downside of that is that what if it's not 100% accurate? And, everyone has typos, everyone has misspellings, everyone, the editing is a pain in the tuchus. It's just the reality of creating anything in life. But yeah, there was like one, I mean, I did a cursory read through of the timeline, and just because it's fresh in my head, I caught one thing that, because I'm a Dragonlance nut job, it spoke out to me, and I thought, oh my gosh, before I go any further into this, do these people know anything about Dragonlance? Like, that is my big concern, because ultimately, if you're unfamiliar with your individual work and your individual passion about the setting, you're just coming into this as someone who wants to buy the product, and you see something that is just wrong as far as the history of the setting. How are you supposed to take that? And so this all comes full circle into me asking you the question, what was the decision-making process for you on what to include as far as the setting of Dragonlance and what not to include?
I kind of tackled that myself, and I think my approach, and I'm actually happy to hear that there's something wrong with it, because with DM's Guild, I could just fix it and release an update.
Yeah.
But in terms of the history, what I wanted to include was the full history, a little bit from each era, because I want you to feel like, even if you're playing this solo, we wanted you to feel like you could set it whenever. Well, which of these time periods speaks most to you? What's interesting going on in the world around your character that speaks to you? And that's going to be different at different time periods throughout history. And then with a slight focus on like, well, also how does all of this affect the orders of high sorcery? We include like the time period before the orders of high sorcery existed too, just to kind of get you there. But yeah, that was the main thing. It's like I didn't want to make it the most comprehensive thing in the world, but I didn't, I wasn't sure how much would be released in Shadow of the Dragon Queen. So I was like, should probably at least have a solid primer from all of the different ages and how they relate to the orders of high sorcery.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a you win for losing. I mean, you include too much and then it becomes irrelevant to the focus of the book. You include too little and then it doesn't add context to what you're actually presenting in the book. So it's like, how are you going to win in this scenario, especially when there's so many other people that are doing just setting styled books already. I guess the argument is, how important is it for someone who's already established, if they're going to pick this up, they're already a wizard in Dragonlance. That's the assumption. And if they're not playing in Dragonlance, they just want to pick this up because it's a fun playthrough and it's a great resource for any wizard to feel, have that moment of testing themselves. Is it even important at that point? You know what I mean? I mean,
no, probably not.
It becomes this big question of if I don't get every little, and I'm only saying this because I've created hundreds upon hundreds of videos and I hear from everyone that sees something in the video and they're like pushing their glasses up. That is not right. Like fucking attacking me for any little misspeaking, even though most of the errors are edition specific, not because the information is inaccurate. And that's the other thing with Dragonlance that is such a pain in the tuchus, is that depending on the edition that you're referencing, it could be completely wrong in the edition that follows it. I mean, just looking at 5th edition, for example, there's huge edition wars within Dragonlance because 5th edition is doing it completely different. And then 3rd edition did it completely different before that. And then Saga did it, but so ultimately you're designing this for 5th. And so it's speaking to that gaming system. So you don't really have to worry about all of those edition errors. But when it comes to researching your information, when it comes to your source material, you had mentioned the Soulforge game book and that you referenced the Towers of High Sorcery from the 3rd edition. Were there any other sources that you referenced in creating this in order to try to sort of wrap your hands around the most complete information for Dragonlance?
I'll let Don take this. He's the lore master between the two of us.
And that's a slight phrase, because anytime, even when I've been running Dragonlance for forever, but it's like, I think of Dragonlance like I think of Star Wars. There's been so many novels. There's been so many, like there's so much out there. I've not read every novel in the world. I think there's like 180 of them or something like that. But I have like, my core that I like when it comes to this kind of thing. Yeah. So the Towers of High Sorcery from 3.5, I think, is one of the few times that like they created a module. It doesn't actually give you all the tools you need to run, but it gives you the framework. Yeah. And it gives you a lot of interesting information too. Some of which is, conflicts things that happen in the books, and some of and vice versa. But the Soulforge, not so much the game book. I've not actually played the game book, or maybe I did when I was a kid.
Not easy, man.
I believe it. But the novel, which is probably more well known, sure, was a big one. The Legends novels and the Lost Chronicles novels, all of the sort of, like, I've always been drawn to the weird, like, conspiracy theories about Raceland and Fist and Dantalus and time travel, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so and there's really good, I think, intrigue, like wizardly intrigue in some of those books. I've always been really compelled by like the politics of the 3 different orders and their leaders over time. So anything like that is, an inspiration in this. And there's, they're there's the hint of those politics in our adventure too, the promise of like more of that to come.
That's great. So, I mean, I've taken up a ton of your time, and we're sort of at the hour mark here. I don't want to belabor anything else, but I do want to give you the opportunity to just sort of speak to, is there anything else that you guys are sort of have noodling in the back of your minds on what you want to do next? Do you want to do anything else in Dragonlance? Is it going to be other settings? Like what's sort of coming down the pipe for both of you?
I mean, I think hopefully our next thing won't be in 3-4 years like we did last time. I mean, I really like this format we have going, and we keep evolving with it as well. As we come up with new challenges, like Chihuahua back again with our first attempt at it, and then we were able to refine it more with the Test of High Sorcery. And I think there's going to be cool other things that we're going to be able to do with it as well, especially if people continue to respond well to solo gaming stuff. So yeah, I think that's still kind of the format where we'll tackle and evolve and take apart for pieces in the future. But it will mostly depend on when we have time and energy, and also what is out there that's interesting to us. It could be Dragonlance. There's a lot of really cool stuff in Dragonlance that I'm still learning about. I spent so much time on the fandom wikis in writing the Test of High Sorcery, being like, okay, let me go look up stuff about Tekisis, and let me go look up stuff about different cults in there, and let me go look up stuff about Frye. So there's some really rich stuff in there. But I don't know. I don't know what we're going to end up making. We're going to make something at some point, but we didn't know we were making this until September, so...
That's fair.
We both kind of have the bug where like we take on a lot of projects and we work with a lot of different publishers, and like a lot of that stuff is like NDA and we can't talk about it forever, and who knows when it's going to be released. It could be like years from now. And we'll chat every once in a while and be like, hey, are you like going crazy right now, or are you bored? Are you looking to do something? And usually the answer is like one of us is like buried in work. And so we haven't done a lot of self-publishing. So it's kind of like up in the air what we'll do next. I think solo adventures they speak to, they're easy to run in digital. They're easier to bring new players into D&D and let them test out playing maybe without more complicated situations. There's something to be said about not just players, but dungeon masters too. When you look at an adventure that's presented this way, oh, here are things I could do, or here are options I could present my players. And I think people have said who have played our previous adventure, which did really well. When I played this, I realized like, oh, there's all these different things that I can do in D&D, and that's what's always made me feel anxious, was not knowing what I can do. It's hard to remember what that feels like for me because I've been playing for so long, but I'm sure there was a time where I felt the same way when I was young, maybe. But yeah, I don't know what we'll do next, whether it'll be Dragonlance, who knows, like, one D&D, or maybe there'll be a 7th edition by then, like I have no idea what the situation will be, but we get to work on a lot of cool game projects, and that takes up a lot of our time, but we're good friends and we've worked together a lot in the past, and I like being able to work on passion projects, things that I feel really strongly about. I'm not doing it because it's necessarily my job, but because there's an opportunity and I get to do with somebody I like, who's talented, and I get to create something that it's kind of a bucket list. Like I dreamed about taking the Test of High Sorcery like Raceland did from when I was a kid, and I read the books and I was like, oh, that would be so cool. What would I have done in that situation? That sort of thing. And so this, it's a bucket list item, and who knows when the next one will come along.
All right.
So basically, it's whatever inspiration will strike us enough that will come out of our hidey holes.
That's right.
Right. Well, I mean, just speaking for myself, I think you did an incredible job, and I would recommend anyone watching this at any time to go pick up Test of High Sorcery. I mean, not only is it great as an individual play aid, I mean, just quickly deviating, like these old books, they reference D&D loosely. This references the current edition of D&D specifically. And so you do feel like you're actually playing Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition while you're going through this solo adventure. But if you just want to run it as, as a DM and have your player go through it and use this as the guide, that's a huge, amazing resource as well. So everything is beautiful. You got the beautiful artwork. Your layout is spectacular. The writing is great. I mean, I think this is, you knocked it out of the ballpark 100%. I highly recommend people check this out. And I don't say that about anything ever. So
Thank you.
I don't know.
I really appreciate it.
I'm hoping you don't put up your gloves for like 2 years again or 3 years or whatever it was. Because
we'll see.
yeah, you should definitely continue doing this. I don't know anyone else is doing this. So it's very, very cool. Thank you both so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And again, congratulations on getting this out there. And can you let the people watching know where they can go find you online, if you have any social media or website or anything like that?
Yeah, I am everywhere as at Kienna S, which is just my name and add an S at the end of it. But obviously, if you want to keep up with us as a DM Guild people, go find our stuff on DM's Guild. We do chat about it on our social medias, but social medias are so fleeting these days. I'll just say that. So I won't say specific places, but
Right.
yeah, go see our other stuff on DM's Guild as well.
Okay.
You can find me anywhere I actually exist. Donathan Frye, Frye. I've got websites and stuff out there. We're both on Twitter right now. We'll see how that goes. But from there, I have links to my portfolio and other games that we both have the same. Like if you're interested in checking out any of the games that we've worked on, you can probably find us through there. But yeah, definitely check out our game on DM's Guild if you get it. Just encourage you when you play it to fill out the survey at the end and let us know if you died or lived and how what robe color you got.
It's
And,
really cool. It's really cool data
Yeah.
to get to see.
It is pretty cool.
How
I
many
love
of
checking
you-
it.
Yeah, how many of you are white robed and red robed and black robed? Because it's interesting numbers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Definitely more white
Are
robes.
there
than we
any
would've
white robes?
expected.
There
No.
are, yeah. It's
Okay.
pretty
Yeah.
even split.
Really?
White
It
robes
was
used to be
a
the most
lot of white
popular.
robes. Yeah, it was a lot of white robes at the beginning. We were getting it the first week, and we're like, where are all these white robes coming from? Well,
Too many good people.
Everybody's so nice.
Yeah.
Now people, now that it's closer to the holidays, people are showing their true colors.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in to the live chat and for engaging with each other. Sorry we didn't get to a ton of your comments or questions and stuff, but that's what happens when you have an engaging conversation. So sorry. But I appreciate you tuning in nonetheless. Anyone else watching this after the fact, please go check out the link in the description to pick up the Test of High Sorcery because it's pretty dope. That is going to do it for our interview today. Thank you again so much for tuning in live. Thank you so much for joining me for this. I would like to take a moment and remind you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Again, everyone hates saying it. Everyone hates hearing it. Like the videos, comment. It all goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. And again, this channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the Dragonlance Saga. So thank you so much for joining me in the celebration. My name has been Adam. Until next time, Slanjavar.